living in your heart. Again, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Brother Rovan. He's already shared with you that what I'm about to share with you today, we have been planning for several months, and for different reasons I wasn't able to do it. And I'm so happy and blessed that we are here today. The Bible tells us in the book of Revelation chapter 12 and verse 11 that they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And as Brother Rovan said, each of us would have a testimony. Each of us have a testimony. This is why God is able to call us to be his representatives, not only to men, but to principalities and powers, as Paul says. Your testimony may not be as dramatic as mine. You may have born in the church, grew up in the church, and you never left the church and had the types of encounter that I will share with you today. And that in of itself is a great testimony of God's keeping power. You know, my dear brothers and sisters, in any testimony, it is impossible to give all the detail, including the greatest testimony of all, the testimony of Jesus Christ. Jesus, when he was confronted by the religious leaders of his time, they were doubting and confronting him and asking him who he really was. And Jesus says in the book of John, chapter 5 and verse 39, "Search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life. For they are they which testify of me." And by the time we get to the end of John's book, John says, "And many more signs truly that Jesus did in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book." And then he continues, he says, "And these things that are written is that ye may know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and by believing in him, ye may have life through his name." He also says that everything that is about Jesus, it would take all the books of the world. I guess if he was living in the computer age, he would say all the hard drives of the world could not hold the story of Jesus. And you and I, brothers and sisters, each of us have a chapter in that story. And I want to share mine today with you. As I said earlier, it's impossible to give you all the details. So what I'm going to do today is to just share some highlights, some high and low points in my life, in my walk with Christ, which I called moments of destiny. Moments of destiny. If I should give this presentation a name, as Brother Rovan says, it would simply be From Crack to Christ, a testimony of God's amazing grace. What you're looking at is one of those testimonies, brothers and sisters. I was not born in this country. I was born in one of the poorest countries and grew up in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the world. You know, that's what happened to Jesus. You know, Nazareth was perhaps the poorest community in that part of the Bible land, and that's where he came from. So I'm in good company. I didn't grow up in a church family. Back in those days, it was more my dad and his friends. They would get together and they would drink and smoke and talk, dirty talk, whatever it was. But my parents did the best they can to try to raise us to do that which is right. I remember that I was the only one from my family, the first one, as a matter of fact, that was able to get through high school back there in Guyana. By the time I got out of high school, I was about 17 years old, and I immediately, shortly thereafter, got a job with the local government. At that point in time, seemed like it was everyone's desire to come to the United States. All the young men that I know, my friends and everybody else, they wanted to come to America because, of course, America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. It still is. With all its problems, brothers and sisters, it's still a great place to be. I began to work with the civil service, and that urge came upon me also to come to the United States. And in those days, it was relatively easy to come to the United States. And so I went through the process and I was able to come. I do remember, because coming to the United States, it was a big deal. It was a big deal, you know. you would have what they call a farewell party the night before, a lot of drinking and getting drunk and all of that. All your friends and family, because, hey, someone is going to the United States. So it was a real big deal. I remember the next day after my farewell, as we went to the airport, I don't know, there must have been 3 or 4 cars, which is a big deal, of friends and family. And I remember very distinctly as I was about to get on the plane that my dad, who I've never seen him cry, but he hugged me, and I'll never forget the words that he says to me. He says that, "You're the first one to go. Don't disappoint us." I submit to you today, and I admit that, yes, I did disappoint them. Because coming to the United States, particularly if you were the first person, it was expected of you that you would come, you would get an education, that you would get a good job, and then you would bring the rest of your family. I failed totally, completely. The first moment of destiny I want to share with you was when I arrived in the United States. A friend of mine was supposed to meet me at John F. Kennedy Airport, and in those days where there were no telephones, except, of course, you were the privileged class in Guyana, there certainly was no internet. And so I got a letter from him about 2 weeks ago that he will meet me at that appointed time, and I came to the United States expecting that he would be there. I cleared the immigration and the customs, and that was a great experience. They welcomed me to the United States. And I got out of the airport. I don't know if you've ever been to John F. Kennedy Airport, the international terminal in New York. And there are these huge panes of glass in the lobby, so you could look outside and you could see the traffic going by. Believe you me, I was so excited and fascinated because I've never seen that many lights in one place in my whole life. And there I was waiting for my friend. 5 minutes, he didn't show up. 10 minutes, he didn't show up. 15 minutes, he didn't show up. 20 minutes, maybe 30, 35 minutes. And there I am between the emotions of excitement and worry. Because here I am, I have no idea where I am. I don't know what's going to happen to me. But the Lord, I recognize that the Lord was in charge of my life because he sent an angel, literally. I'm standing there looking out, and I felt this tap on my shoulder. And as I turned around, there was a lady and her 2 daughters. I don't know who they are, and she called out a name. And when I turned around, she recognized that it was not the person she thought it was, and she says, "Excuse me." And we began conversation, and I told her that I just came in from Guyana, and the flight that I came in on, and my friend was supposed to meet me, but he didn't show up. And so she says, "Wow, my son was supposed to be on that flight, and he looks just like you." So she says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know." I said, I've reached into my pocket, and I pulled out a letter that my mother had given me to give to a friend of hers who had been here in the United States before I came here. And I showed her the letter and the address. I said, "I have this letter, and my mom gave me this letter to give to my aunt." And she says, "Oh, don't worry about that. This is right around the corner from us." And they took me. We rode the train, and then we rode the bus, and then the bus again, and we got there. She took me up to the lady's house. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and of course, she was quite surprised to see me. She wasn't expecting me. It was a very small apartment, very small bedroom. Her husband, and her niece lived there. Her niece was about the same age as mine. And so she says, "Well, you're here. What are we going to do?" And the lady and her daughter left. I've never seen them again. I've never seen them again. If you're listening, please, please identify yourself and let me know. I'll come wherever you are just to get to meet you. But whether it was I have just forgotten, or whether it was truly and in fact an angel, it was indeed an angel, because they came and they did what angels did. They rescued me. And that was my first moment of destiny. I started out my life, I always had great ambitions, to be in the business world. And, you look at the movies back in your country, and it shows you all the great things about America. And I was certainly hoping that that would be my experience. But coming here, it was quite different. My first job was in a factory. Never worked in a factory yet in my life. I worked in the civil service, and there were days that I wished that I had never come to America and wanted to go back. But shortly after I got here, I recognized the value of education. And I put myself through college. I remember in some semesters I would carry 20 and 21 credits. And I would work at nights at Chase Manhattan Bank. And back in those days, we were processing the computers with these cards, and you would be organizing those and shipping them from one location to the other. And I remember many weeks that I would not shower for a couple of days because I would go from work at night, straight to school in the morning, and then back to work. Then maybe the next day, you know, I would carry less credits and that sort of thing. But the Lord blessed me, and I was able to earn my degree. And I then began to, my degree was in marketing, sales, and management. I always had the desire to be a writer. I was never trained as a writer. Those of you from the Caribbean, I was one of the first persons to start a Caribbean magazine in the United States. It was called Caribbean Digest, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I began to make some bad choices and began to hang out with the wrong crowd, friends from my neighborhoods where I was born and grew up. And everybody was a drug dealer or a pickpocket or a trickster's conman or something like that, a house jumper. But I started to associate with that company. And at the same time, I got a good job with a very prestigious American corporation. It's still around today. If I had stayed there, maybe I might have been the president today, I don't know. But in any event, I began to make these bad choices. I always, even from in Guyana, maybe from the tender age of 15 or 16, I began to smoke marijuana and started drinking alcohol because that's what I was surrounded with. But it got to the point where I began to use cocaine. And those of you that are not familiar, when you use cocaine, it gives you a euphoria, it gives you a high, and you want to go back and get more of it and more of it. Also, I praise and thank God that I'm using my skills today for Jesus, to draw people to Him, because I've always had this nature of evangelism, of promotion, if you will. And so I used to promote parties and fashion shows and that sort of thing. And I met a young lady. She was a model, and I don't know if you want to call it fell in love or what, but anyway, it was a relationship. And we ended up having a daughter. And we moved from Brooklyn, New York to Washington, D.C. And the relationship didn't last very long. She moved back to Brooklyn, New York, and I moved back behind her. And when I came back to New York, I stayed with a friend, and he was a drug dealer. And he lived in his mother's basement, and one afternoon that we were down there, I see he pulled out this, what you call a pipe. It's literally a piece of pipe with a bowl. And he dropped this nugget in it, a little white nugget. It's called crack cocaine. And what crack cocaine is, you see, the cocaine that you would sniff, let me give you a little education, it's mixed with other chemicals so that you're able to sniff it. What crack cocaine is, you do the reverse. It's reverse engineering. You take out all the mixture that they had mixed it with, and what you're left with is raw, natural cocaine. They call it crack. And the reason that they call it crack, because when you put it in the pipe, and you smoke it, it goes crack, 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 crack. He says, so he invited me, and he said, why don't you try it, take a hit? I don't know if you're listening to me out there, but if anyone ever offer you cocaine, particularly crack cocaine, turn around and run. Because that first hit, it gave me such a euphoria, something I've never felt in my life. And that is what gets you addicted. Because you go after more and more and more crack cocaine to get back to that high that you initially had. and you'll never get back there. What it does is destroys your life, which it did to me, because it became the center of my life. I remember at one time in the promotion of the magazine, I was working with business people in New York, and I had what you would call Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality. Those of you who are familiar with the story Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's an English story that is written by a man by the name of John Louis Stevenson. And what it is, it's an allegory showing and trying to present the conflict that exists in all of us between good and evil. Dr. Jekyll was a scientist, a very respectable scientist. And he mixed this potion and he drank it, and then he became Dr. Hyde, which was the vilest person that you could think about. I was Dr. Jekyll as I would go around and sell ads for the paper. I had on my suit and my tie, would talk to the local businessmen, and they would write me checks, and then I would go home at night and I'll become Mr. Hyde. Because I'll cash the checks and put the money in the crack cocaine pipe. But you could only hide that type of thing for so long. Eventually, I ended up losing my apartment and everything that I had, and I went to one of the gentlemen that is a businessman that used to support the paper, and I did something that I've never done before. I asked him to borrow $20, and he looked at me in my eyeball to eyeball, and he says, "Aubrey, do you use drugs?" And I looked back at him, and he said, "No." And then he said to me some words which I thought was the most cruel words he could have said at that time, but it turned out it was the sweetest song that I've ever heard. He says, "You don't need money. You need Jesus." He says, "I'm going to invite you to my church. My church meets on Saturdays, and here is the address. I want to see you." I didn't go immediately, but every now and again I would show up, dressed up, and everybody in the church would meet me and greet me, had on my Sabbath best and everything like that. And this particular week, I got out from selling the ads. I cashed the checks, and I said, well, all I'm going to do today is spend about $5. I went out the house, and of course, the stock and trade of the devil is deception. And that's what he was telling me. All you need today is $5. To make a long story short, by the time the night was over, I had used up all the money that I got, maybe about $200 or $300. Didn't even take time to take my clothes out of the cleaners. Had some friends, they all left. And I remember laying on that couch. I was sweating profusely. You could hear my heart beating from where you are. I didn't know God the way I know him now, but I cried out and said, "Save my life." And the Lord responded to me. This is about maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. He said, "You must go to church. You must go to church." I didn't even have enough money to get on the bus. Didn't take my clothes out to the cleaners, the few pieces that I had. So I had on I reached out, I picked up my jeans and a sweater, and I started a walk. Those of you that are familiar with Brooklyn, this church is located on Eastern Parkway, which is the main thoroughfare, in Nostrand Avenue. They're not a Seventh-day Adventist church, but the pastor was a man by the name of Dr. F.E. Roy Jeffries. He used to be a Seventh-day Adventist, but he had some problems with the church or whatever, and he separated from the church. Very dynamic speaker. And so I began to walk from where I lived on Crook Avenue in Flatbush to Eastern Parkway in Nostrand. It must have been about maybe 5 or 6 miles, I don't know. But I started to walk, and I'm walking, and each step that I'm taking, I'm just saying in my heart, "Lord, please give me the strength." And I'm walking, I'm perspiring, sweating profusely, and my eyeballs are large and open and wide. And I got to the church. And when I got to the church, there was a big surprise. Everybody that greeted me previously when I was Dr. Jekyll now saw me as Mr. Hyde. And there I am, and people would turn away from me and what have you. But the Lord kept talking to my heart, and what I'm saying now is in retrospect, because I didn't know that was happening at the time. And I walked into the church, and I walked up to the first or the second pew. And that particular day, I'll never forget it. Dr. Jeffries, he was a very animated and dynamic speaker. And he had on the platform a full-size mirror. And his message that day was God's relationship to man and how valuable we are in the eyes of God. And as he kept preaching, I don't remember any scripture text or anything like that, but I do remember the theme of what he was talking about. And he was talking to me because he was telling me that regardless of the situation that you're in, that you have value in the sight of God. And he kept looking at me on and off. When he finished the sermon, he got down from the platform and he came directly over to me and gave me a handshake that I will never forget. And all he said to me was, "How are you?" I said, "I'm doing fine." He said that God loves you. Of course, by the time the service was over, I just slipped out of the church, didn't stop to talk with anyone, including my friend that invited me, and I started my journey back home. Wasn't able to fall asleep until maybe late at night. So, I'm going through all this trauma, and I'm thinking to myself, am I going to make it? What is going to happen to my daughter particularly? She was about maybe 10 or 11 years old at that time. And in my crack cocaine habit, I would sometimes get the power and the strength not to use it on certain weekends because I would go and get her and bring her to spend time with me. And we would have a wonderful time together, take her to McDonald's. Yes, I did eat some McDonald's. And just have a good time. We go to the park there in Brooklyn. We would ride on the boats, and we would just have a wonderful time together. This one particular weekend, I went and picked her up and brought her to the house. And I was living in a small studio apartment. And the two of us, we would hang out there, I on the couch, I would give her the bed, and we would have fun together. But this particular week, I said to her, "Excuse me, sweetheart, I got to go outside and come right back." I went outside and bought some crack. And then I went to the bathroom and I started to smoke. And as I came out of the bathroom, there was my baby with her backpack on her back and her hands to the doorknob with tears in her eyes. And I said, "What happened, baby?" She said, I'm leaving. I said, "Why?" She says, "Daddy, you have to stop doing this. Because if you don't, you're going to die. And I'm going to be without a daddy." It touched me, but I never stopped. I stopped for that night because I put my arms around her and embraced her, told her that I'm sorry and I love her. And she came back and we spent the rest of the weekend having a very good time. It got to the point whereby, you see, when you're on crack cocaine or any other drug, it's the only thing that matters to your life. So when you see someone that is on drugs doing certain things to get those drugs, you must understand that that is the only thing that is important, that is of importance to them. Not food, not medicine, not family, not mother, not father, nothing else is important. I was there. I decided that I'm going to run away from myself at one point. And so I just left my apartment. I didn't know any rent. I just left. And I bought a one-way ticket and went to Miami, only to run into friends that are in the same business. It just so happens that I ended up actually selling drugs in one of the drug houses, because he says if you have to stay here, well, then you got to do something. Know that I have a one-way ticket, no money. I ended up selling drugs. I'm not going to go through the details to give the devil any credit to let you know how I was able to get out of there, except to say that I was able to make enough money after a while to get out, continuing with the magazine. I haven't given up the magazine yet. Owe a lot of people because I've been spending the money that they gave me. And so at that time, I decided that I'm going to go through and try to complete the magazine. And there was a company in Miami called the Beacon Council that advertised that they would offer loans to small business people that are trying to create businesses. And of course, I put on my Dr. Jekyll outfit and I went up there, and I was sitting in the lobby, and sitting in the lobby across from me was a gentleman that we introduced ourselves. His name is Robert. I told Robert why I'm there. I'm trying to get funding and so on, would like to talk about that. And Robert told me, he says, wow. He says, I work for a publisher. That's the person that puts together magazines or books. He says, I work for a publisher. And they're from the Caribbean. They're from Grenada. I says, really? I said, yes, I would like to meet them. And he gave me his number. I called the gentleman. His name is Kenneth Ned. Kenneth, if you're hearing me, I want to let you know how much I appreciate you because the part that you have played in my life. And I went by to see Kenneth, called him up, made an appointment, went back to see Kenneth. And we sat down and we talked for a little bit, and he says, hey, we'll work with you. We'll help you. We'll give you the support and the resources that you need to put this together. And at the end of the conversation, we got up. I'm barely 5'3". Kenneth was about 6'7". And he looked down at me and he shook my hand. And as he shook my hand, he says, Aubrey, do you go to church? I said, no, not really, man, but I used to go to a church in Brooklyn, used to go on Saturday. He says, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and I want to invite you to church. It was close to the end of the year, and they invited me to the New Year's Eve meeting. And brothers and sisters, I don't know about you, but I showed up that night, and I have never felt so much love in my life in a long time, because Kenneth introduced me to everybody. This is his friend. We'll be working on the magazine, and they just accepted me. But of course, I'm still struggling with the crack cocaine. It just so happened that I had gotten, again, another little studio apartment, but because of my drug use, same type of thing I was doing in Brooklyn, going to the businessmen, selling the ads, and putting the money in the crack cocaine pipe. I ended up losing that apartment. I talked with the pastor of the church, an old Jamaican pastor. He is still alive, Pastor Holness. If you're listening, I want to say to you again tonight, thank you. And I opened up to Pastor Holness a little bit, and I told him that I'm homeless because I lost my apartment. He says, okay, let me talk to some of the brethren and then see what we could do for you. You know, God has got a great sense of humor. I'm just excited. God has got a great sense of humor. It just so happens that one of the elders in the church had a building right across the street from the church, which he divided up into rooms and rented to the males in the single males in the church. So he would share the bathroom and, you know, share the kitchen, and each one had their room. And he had one room left. One room left. It was about the size up to here and about here. It had a dresser and a bed and a window right at the head of the bed. So when I raise up in the morning, guess what? The first thing I see is the church right across the street. So I'm now going to church, but I'm still struggling. Some Sabbaths, Kenneth would invite me to have lunch with his family. A lot of Sabbaths after church, I would go from the church straight to the crack house. But I'm struggling, and I'm struggling. Maybe some of the brethren may be suspected because I was good at covering up what I was doing, but the Lord knows. And I want to let you know today that Paul tells us that he who has begun a good work in you will see it, will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. And in all my struggles, God gave me the victory. I remember very clearly, our brothers and sisters, that in that condition, some Friday nights I would go out and I would go and buy crack and come back and smoke and still manage to get up to struggle into the church. I'm tired. My mind is messed up, but I would still make it to church. And then from church, I'd just run back across the street and go back and crash out on my bed. Brothers and sisters, my crack cocaine addiction estranged me from my family. I hadn't talked to my family in only God knows how many years. The only person I was in touch with from time to time was my daughter. And if you want to start World War III, you could tell her what a terrible person her dad is. That's the kind of love that we have between us. You can't tell her anything negative or bad about her daddy. As a matter of fact, she sent me a text today. I got to be calling her this evening. We talk often. Brothers and sisters, I want you to know I haven't told you, like John says, there are many more things, more signs that are not written in this book. There is much more about my story, but I'm not here to glorify the bad experiences that I had. I do want to tell you that there are a lot of scars. There are a lot of scars, mental and emotional scars. But Jesus, He's the great healer. He is the great physician. I don't know what your struggles are, my dear brothers and sisters, but what I do know, that Jesus is able. I'm a living testimony. I was that guy that you probably passed on the road coming here today that looked like he didn't have a shower for months and was homeless. I was there. And God reached down and pulled me from the pit of sin to His pulpit. He came to the drug house and moved me to His house. My mind that was messed up, my mind that was debilitated, He has put my mind back together. I did some research and I found out about something called synapse, how the brain operates through electricity, and neuroplasticity, what that is, how your brain functions. And what I realized is that this book, those things that the doctors are now talking about, God had given it to us very clearly. When He says, as you behold, you become changed. When He says, be not transformed, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, what He was talking about was neuroplasticity and synapse. Because what the synapse does, it fires electricity from one nerve cell to the other. The neuroplasticity, as those synapses are firing, it's making a path in your brain. I live out in the country and I walk around my house and it creates a path. If I stop walking for a few days, then the grass begins to grow back. If I go walk on a different path, then it creates a path. And that's what is really and truly is neuroplasticity. It's the paths that are created in your brain. So by the use of cocaine and concentrating on the lasciviousness and the things that I used to do, it created a path in my brain. But I picked up a book. Amen. I picked up a book and I read a story about a man named Jesus. A man named Jesus that said unto me, come unto me, all ye that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. I want to let you know today that I found that rest in Jesus Christ. The ancient prophet Isaiah says that He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our sins are upon Him, and by His stripes we are healed. I want to let you know today that I'm a walking testimony of those stripes, what Jesus could do in a life. If you had seen me 20 years ago, you wouldn't pay a dime for me. But Pastor Jeffries let me know that I have value in the sight of God. My brothers and sisters, as we come together each Sabbath, let us remember what a privilege it is to be representatives of the God of the universe. I can't keep my mouth shut. Each day that I go out, I ask the Lord, who could I show your love to today? I carry around food in my car. And people that I meet that are in need, I share it with them. Of course, I carry around tracts. I work in a school system. God has called you and I to make a difference. Your story is different from mine. But nevertheless, God wants us, because of what he has done in our lives, to be a witness to him, to the universe. I pray that as I share today, that some heart is touched, some life would be transformed, but most of all, that Jesus Christ would be lifted up. Wherever you are, I want you to know that he has a fountain that flows with illimitable love. His grace is so amazing that the universe can't contain his grace. His mercy is bottomless. What's troubling you today? What's troubling you today? I want you to know that Jesus is able. That Jesus is able, and I stand here as a living testimony. You know, let me tell you a quick story about the gentleman that wrote this story. His name is John Newton. John Newton used to be involved in the most ignominious of humans' endeavor, which was the African slave trade from West Africa back to England. And somewhere along the line, he heard about a man named Jesus, and God touched his heart, and his began to change. And on one of his trips back from West Africa back to England, he stepped out on the deck of the slave ship. And as he looked out on the wide expanse of the sky, with the stars glittering in the sky and the calm ocean, God moved upon his heart. One person suggested that as he heard the groans of those that were in the belly of the slave ship, that he began to write those words, "Amazing grace, how sweet a sound that saved a wretch like me." Amazing grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils,
whatever your challenges that you're faced with, he wants to calm the storms in your life. What he has done for me, he will do for you. Amen. Because he's no respecter of persons. His grace is truly amazing, as I discovered in my walk from crack to Christ. God bless you.